Okay, as Robert mentioned, our topic is space, the final frontier. And we're talking about like real estate, space properties, and everything that has to go with outer space. And we're all Aggies in this room, and I know one day we'll make enough money to go to space and own property. So I want y'all to think about if you want to own property one day in space as we present this. My part is definitions or key terms. And I broke it up into 3 parts. And so I have outer space, kind of what exactly are we talking about here. I have legal terms, and as referring to real estate. And then the last one is miscellaneous terms, which is just a couple terms that I could not fit into the other slides. So, what is space? When you hear the word space, outer space, what do y'all think? Black, Star Trek. Aliens. Good. Anybody else? Space, outer space, what comes to mind?
Astronauts.
Astronauts. Great. Okay, so dictionary.com, our great friend, says it is the space beyond the atmosphere of the Earth. So that's pretty general, it's pretty vague. Barry Dayton says outer space is the void that exists between celestial bodies. And so a celestial body is can be an asteroid, it can be the Earth, moon, stars, anything that floats in outer space that has space in between objects. So we're talking about 62 miles between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. And this word is just a technical term for space. Okay, so we're talking about everything above the 62-mile diameter. And that's about from here to Cyprus, generally. Okay, a lot of y'all know that reference point. It's a suburb of Houston. So that's how far it is. So I talked about the ionosphere, and then asteroids and meteoroids. I know these terms are thrown around a lot, and we know what they are, but just to confirm that, a meteoroid is very small. It can be a couple inches to a meter long. And then an asteroid is like what we think of in the movies. You know, we go and we land on the asteroid and blow it up, save the Earth. So it can be like 10 meters to up to 1 kilometer wide. Okay, so legal dealings in outer space. Through our research, we found the ITU, which is the International Telecommunication Union, and it is run by the United Nations. And it's a specialized agency for information and communication technologies. So from reading on their website, I know this is a very ambiguous term, but they literally connect the world. They let the world communicate, whether it's through any kind of media, television, texting, social media, whatever it is, they govern the space that is used. And so it governs orbits, space orbits. So an orbit, just to remind y'all, is anything that circles the Earth, the Moon, or a star, okay? So y'all can imagine all the countries would fight and bicker over the space that is above them. And so they govern that and say, no, everyone can use it, and you can actually be a part of this union, whether you're a public institution or a private institution. As far as ownership goes of property, we have legal merit, and the definition of this is just to be worthy of or deserving of. So do we merit land on the moon? Can we just go up there and own it, or do we have to buy it through someone, or something like that? So leasing and renting is pretty basic. I know y'all do this at your homes. So we can think of it as you're leasing a property, you pay rent to the owner, okay? And then, okay, so the miscellaneous terms are weapons of mass destruction. I wrote them. We pretty much know what that is. The FBI's website defines it as weapons that have relatively large-scale impact on people, property, and/or infrastructure. And then the Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer of the federal government. So hopefully these terms help you all get an idea of what we're talking about. And the next topic we will discuss is the history of the treaties.
Okay. So he provided a little bit of the background. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of it, kind of how international space laws come about. It's still pretty new. Kind of like what are some of the laws of the treaty that are preventing us from literally just going up there right now. So international space law really began in the 50s when space race was coming about. Russia sending Sputnik up in space, and we're trying to land people on the moon. And so it came around to make sure that space was used peacefully and not in a way that would endanger any of us. So the majority of the space laws and treaties are run by the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which has 72 member states, including the United States. And it's still in its infancy. A lot of these treaties and stuff all have like really vague terms and ideas just so that they can get passed, and so it's really up to interpretation because it's such a new field. So the three most important treaties that we have are the Outer Space Treaty, the Moon Treaty, and the Partial Test Ban Treaty. The first one is the Outer Space Treaty. It's pretty much the most important one the one that's like really the first major one. It was originally titled the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States and the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. And this was ratified in 1967, which was 10 years after Sputnik and 2 years before we landed on the moon. Countries who signed are Russia, the United States, the United Kingdom, as well as many other countries, totaling about 100. And this treaty binds parties to use outer space only for peaceful purposes. It forbids any kind of weapons of mass destruction in orbit or on the moon, and no countries can claim power over the moon. So they can't just go up there and be like, we own the moon. And participating countries agree to be responsible for their actions in space and conduct them in a safe manner. And according to the Journal of Air Law and Commerce, published by the SMH government, it's generally agreed upon that this treaty only bans national ownership of the moon, but not necessarily private ownership. And so that's where kind of some of the vague ideas come from. The second one is the Moon Treaty from 1979. And it was meant to kind of expand on and elaborate on the Outer Space Treaty. It declared that the moon and any other celestial bodies should be used for the benefit of everyone. So countries can go up there and do their research, but then they need to share the research with the world, and not just kind of go and do their own thing. It also prohibits any military use or weapons testing, and again, any countries claiming sovereignty. However, this is pretty much considered a failed treaty because basically at the time, none of the spacefaring countries, including the United States, considered it useful. So it's not even, the United States didn't even ratify it. That's 2013. Several years later, only 15 countries have ratified it. And so it's not really considered part of international law, but it's still kind of important because it's showing where the flaws in the international space law has become. But it seems to be understood that if the U.S. had ratified it, it would have prohibited private ownership, which is something that we didn't want to do. And aside from celestial property, there's also the issue of nuclear testing. For this is the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which was first ratified by the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, the three main space-faring countries, and then by most other countries. So basically every country has done this, and what it says is that you can't do any kind of nuclear testing except for underground. So that means you can't do it underwater, you can't do it in the atmosphere, and you can't do it in outer space. But however, in some cases, nuclear power is required on certain space missions, and so there's also the principles relevant to the use of nuclear power sources, which says that if you go up there and have it, you just have to make sure that you're being really safe about it. So now we've covered the three main treaties. There are also a few other ones. There's the Convention on Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space, and so that basically means that if you're going to put something in space, you have to register it with the Secretary General. And also the Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects, which elaborates more on the responsibility. So if you go up there, you do something, you got to pay for all damages if anything goes wrong. Pretty much these acts, treaties, declarations, and principles set the path for developing international space law. And since it's in its infancy, it's very likely there are going to be many changes coming about as Chad was saying, like the commercialization of space travel is likely to occur with many companies, like private companies, trying to go out into space. So now that you're with some of the background, you'll be able to better understand the different issues that we're going to talk about, and Veronica will go on to talk to you about nuclear testing.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly hint at the treaty that she spoke about, which is the Treaty of Outer Space, essentially, and in particular Article 4, which says that you cannot place in orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kind of weapons of mass destruction. This limits the use of weapons of mass destruction in space. Obviously, the treaty, like she mentioned, also requires that all research and exploration be for peaceful purposes. So although there are current laws that do not allow us to use weapons of mass destruction in space, we can still consider what it would be like to use them. So why not? I mean, space is a strategic location. It's the ultimate high ground. You don't have to be constantly looking up. I guess we can do things, but let's not. And it's also an empty medium, so there will be no people or very limited amount of people, therefore probably reducing the amount of lives lost. There are also no physical constraints. If you were fighting on land, there's trees and buildings and other people that might get in the way. Objects can move faster in space, allowing for quick counterattacks. This is both considering that spaceships move faster than like Navy ships or vehicles, as well as if there is a land attack that we can quickly target that area from space. If weapons of mass destruction were allowed in space, many countries would strive for economic and technological advances. So people will be pushing to get the weapons of mass destruction to, like right now we're kind of limited on what it is that we're trying to. I'm assuming at this point that the government is not doing secret stuff behind our back, right? I should just throw that out there. But, so these all sound like great ideas as to why we shouldn't do it in space. We're really going to harm. There's nothing really out there. But we still have to consider a lot of the negative impacts. For example, the United States and Russia are the two biggest players in this field of space. And that would limit all the other countries, especially less developing countries that don't have much going on right now. We would quickly dominate space in a negative way. Satellites also need protection. A lot of people use satellites. GPS is a common satellite that we use out in space. And if they were to be harmed, then that would quickly damage our communication and simple things like I mentioned, GPS. This protection also has to extend to civilians. How exactly would we protect unsuspecting victims? What type of warfare rules would apply? And how would we be able to monitor warfare up there? So allowing weapons of mass destruction in space creates a lot of conflict and lack of protection to unprotected people. Weapons also cost money, and this is something that a lot of taxpayers might have concerns with. This would be a huge expense. Lastly, the environment of space is different from our environment here. We might create something on the Earth's surface, and it might react differently once we put it out there. So we're not quite sure how it's going to work. Not only do we have to consider how they might react differently in space, we also have to consider what sort of repercussions they might ensue onto Earth's atmosphere, and how the atmosphere might respond. So although weapons of mass destruction in space or space weapons seem like a far-fetched idea, there is one controversial topic that I came across as kind of interesting. It's known as HAARP. HAARP stands for High Frequency Active Oral Research Program. It claims its goal is to be able to understand and enhance communication and delivery systems for both civilian and defensive purposes, which basically means that we use all sorts of frequencies and ways allegedly to improve communication. And I say allegedly because it has a controversial instrument called IRI, Ionospheric Research Instrument, which uses the energy from pulsating electromagnetic frequencies to beam directly into the atmosphere. This is using weather to target specific countries. People have attributed HAARP to major weather occurrences such as the tsunami that happened in Japan, even Hurricane Katrina, as well as other major earthquakes. So they're saying that this is going off of FBI's definition of weapons of mass destruction, that it can include any weapon to harm a large amount of people and their infrastructure. This is a controversy, and thankfully HAARP was dismantled or shut down in May of 2013 due to insufficient funds. It's not something that we have to worry about, but it's something that we still have to take into consideration. Are we able to actually use not necessarily space weapons, but weapons that use space to harm other people? And then we'll go on to talk about property rights.
Howdy, class. I'd like to open up this the discussion of property with a narrative. Gregory W. Nimitz, in March 2000, filed a Class D property permit with the Archimedes Institute
for a little piece of land. This land was known as Eros 433 and contained $492 quadrillion worth of platinum. NASA, almost a year later, February 12th, landed the Mir spacecraft on the asteroid. It was the first spacecraft that we've ever landed on an asteroid, and that's what they called it. Nimitz, on the other hand, labeled it Parking Space 29 and promptly proceeded to send NASA a $20 parking ticket. And while NASA, and later the Attorney U.S. General, have since dismissed Nimitz, saying that his claim is without legal merit. But why? Who exactly owns space? Currently, space is regulated by the Collective, the United Nations, who have structured several different treaties to oversee how space operates. Which brings us to the two sides of the controversy. Should we have a collective such as the United Nations regulate space, or should individuals such as countries, companies, or even private citizens have the right to take to space and one day homestead it? Both the 1979 Moon Treaty and the 1967 Outer Space Treaty work in tandem to provide boundaries on what we can or cannot accomplish in space. To paraphrase, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, are not subject to national appropriation. That outer space is, in fact, the common good of all mankind, which means outer space is owned by mankind and only by all of mankind. There isn't a single sovereign nation today that will recognize anyone's claim to any celestial body, such as asteroids, meteors, or even lunar real estate. However, there is no law, no treaty preventing me from going up to space with my family, building myself a nice home, and moving it, besides my financials, of course. It wouldn't be stealing, it wouldn't be trespassing, and it wouldn't be loitering. Because of the way the current treaties are structured, if I chose to build a spacecraft and go to Eros 433, harnessed it and brought it back safely down to Earth, would it then be mine? Didn't I do all the work to go ahead and possess this asteroid? Or is it still considered one of those celestial bodies, and that it is the property of everyone? As it stands, several private entities such as SpaceX, Mars One, NASA, and even some publicly funded things like NASA and the RKA, which is the Russian space program, are not only creating technologies that will help us explore the cosmos, but one day help us homestead it. Dr. Katharina Dorlin from the Space Institute of Art and Space Law at McGill University says that the 1967 Moon Space Treaty has not only prevented space travel, but has also stifled space exploration. Since we consider space to be the common heritage of all mankind, I no longer have the same incentives that I would to go ahead and get Eros 433 and bring it back, because it would be owned by everyone. There's no reason for me to go out to space and waste my time and energy to go and do this. But there are a few things that down here on Earth represent what happened up there in space. If we look at the Antarctic, there was an Antarctic treaty that took place that was actually what the Outer Space Treaty was structured on. That prevents all the other countries around Earth from actually going down to the Antarctic and claiming it as its own. That's why it's practically barren. But conversely, if you take a look at the Arctic all the way to the north, we are currently having a natural resource boom. We have oil factories and other companies popping up all over the place because there isn't any restriction on what you can or cannot do up there, at least not to the same extent as the Antarctic not being able to be appropriated by any nation or other body. But there are a few things that you can't actually own in space. There's stuff that I put there and orbits. The Moon Treaty states that anything that you put in space remains the original ownership of whoever put it there initially. So NASA, when they put the Mars rover on Mars, it's still their property, even if we're shut down or whatnot. And you can even bring some of these things to auction, and that has been done in the past. Some broken down rovers on the moon have actually been sold to private citizens. And the other thing is orbits, and that was done. And who manages the orbits is the International Telecommunication Union, as discussed earlier. And it doesn't work the same way real estate down here on Earth works. In that you just can't go and buy it. You have to go to the UN. You have to get approval from the UN, and then you have to actually build it. You actually have to use it in order for it to count. And In 1976, there was a Declaration of Bugada, which was a collection of individual states like Brazil and other states in Southern America that wanted to actually claim the airspace above them as a natural resource, and their claim was largely ignored by the international community. And since they had no power to actually oppose, that's
Sorry, I gave you a minute.